Hi, and welcome to the Debrief on this 24th anniversary of September 11th. We're going to be talking a lot today about civil society, safety, and freedom. These have a tragic through line with what we've seen kind of happen just this week. We have the anniversary of September 11th, the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and then we had the murder on the light rail in Charlotte. All of these things tragically linked because we're really talking about, can prosperity and freedom happen when public safety isn't guaranteed? Is our civil society really boiling over? This is something we're going to be talking a lot about today. Of course, we have Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation joining us here, and David Larson, managing editor of Carolina Journal. But first, we're going to go straight to Nick Craig. He's been covering what's been happening at a press conference here at the state legislature just today. And they're talking about investigating Charlotte for what happened there on the light rail. Good morning, Nick.
Hey, Donna. Yeah, it has been a busy week in North Carolina news. Late last week, video surveillance footage released from a Charlotte light rail on a situation that happened back on August the 22nd showed a pretty horrific scene unfolding when a Ukrainian immigrant, 23-year-old Irina Zaruska, was just heading home from work on a random weeknight when she was brutally assaulted and attacked by an individual on the Charlotte light rail train. That situation, because of the surveillance footage being released, caused an incredible amount of national attention to the state of North Carolina, really from across the country and really across the globe. As we watched that situation unfold, President Donald Trump commented on it, lawmakers across the state of North Carolina and the country, all leading up to a press conference in the General Assembly on Thursday, in which Senate Leader Phil Berger and the leader of the North Carolina House, Destin Hall, announced that when the legislature does come back later this month, towards the end of September, they will be introducing new legislation to try and revoke things like cashless bail, holding magistrate judges more accountable to the decisions they make, and a plethora of other issues to try and provide additional safety for residents across North Carolina.
This really is a tragic situation, what we saw unfold in Charlotte. But the legislative response is really interesting to me to see. Speaker Berger, we have Destin Hall, Leader Berger, Speaker Hall, and Michael Whatley, former chairman of the RNC and NCGOP, now Senate candidate. What are some of the things, Mitch, that you think that they say that they're going to be looking at, some real policies that they hope will make a difference?
Well, Nick alluded to them. They talked about magistrates and the fact that North Carolina really gives a lot of discretion to magistrates. And in this Charlotte case, that was one of the things that has been pointed out, is that this particular suspect has been in and out of jail on 14 different occasions. And on the last occasion, basically the magistrate said you could sign a paper and agree to come back and appear for your court appearance. And basically what Hall and Berger and to some extent Whatley were also saying was, look, after a certain number of arrests and violent activities, should this person be able to just say, oh, I'll come back and appear, or should he stay in jail? And I think that's one of the things they're looking at. They also talked about an examination of Charlotte and Mecklenburg County and grants they were getting from outside groups that are against cashless bail. And so that was one of the things they talked about. My guess is this is also still in the works. This is something that's going to happen when they come back later in September. By that point, we'll have a lot more meat on the bones. At this point, I think they just wanted to get out there and say, look, this is a big issue. Right. We're going to deal with it.
Sure. Nick, let me have a quick question for you. Do you think this is striking while the iron is hot, that there's an appetite to do some of these things? One of the big items that he mentioned was bringing back the death penalty in North Carolina.
Yeah, I think so, Donna, because we've seen the national attention. President Trump commented on this Sunday of last week when he was getting off of Air Force One, talked about it through Monday and Tuesday of this week. And since then, I don't think we've seen a political story that's taken place in North Carolina like this get national coverage or international coverage like this in the better part of a decade. And I think a lot of folks across the state are asking their local elected officials, whether it is folks on their city council or their county commission, and even looking up to Raleigh, to their members in the North Carolina General Assembly, to figure out what can be done so a situation like this does not unfold again, not only in Charlotte, but really any city across North Carolina.
Sure. What do you think about this? Do you think we're at boil over point? We talk about civil society a lot, even just right around our office. Do you think that we are at kind of a tipping point?
I do think these are very high-profile sorts of things, especially as Nick said, this got international attention.
Sure.
The thing in Charlotte, and then in Utah, you saw Charlie Kirk, who conservatives were already up in uproar over the Charlotte thing, and then this is one of the main leaders of that generation of young people for conservatives. Him just being killed out in the open. You also had in Minnesota, not too long before that, the children inside of a Catholic church just killed. So there's been a few high-profile things, and we've had polling recently that showed people are very concerned about public safety. I think it's kind of had an upswing since the 90s. After the 90s, it was a high point of violent crime, and it went down for a while. And now there has been kind of an uptick. Some cite sort of a Ferguson effect, where police have been a little scared with the Black Lives Matter and the negative attention on police, that they've backed off some, and that a lot of violent crime and homicide has actually returned, maybe due to that, because people have not given the police as much leeway as they can to just arrest the bad guys, get them off the street, and actually keep them in jail. Because even if they arrest somebody 14 times, they're doing their job. It's maybe the justice system, magistrates that are not taking those people and keeping the public safe. So I definitely think it's something that is at a boiling point. I have family and friends who reach out and they're like, is something going to be done? You work in sort of the political sphere. People are concerned about it.
Right. But these aren't new ideas. John Locke Foundation had a big report on public safety and community policing. You think now people are seeing, okay, we need to return to some of these core principles?
I think it certainly brings the conversation back to the fore, and I think one of the things that's somewhat unfortunate about the issue in Charlotte is that this probably would not have attracted the attention that did if not for the video. Remember, this happened in late August, but we really didn't have the uproar until people saw the video, saw that this woman was just sitting there minding her own business, looking kind of small and timid and scrolling on her phone. And if you looked at the video, you just knew something bad was going to happen with that guy. And then you don't even have to watch the whole video. You could see some of the frames showing just how terrible this was. And I think because people saw the video, it just made them think, oh, this really could happen to anyone going on one of these public transportation facilities.
Sure. Switching real quick, you mentioned Charlie Kirk. This is something that, as a parent, I have been so grateful for the impact in his life has had on that generation, because he has inspired what feels like an entire generation to think more critically, to be curious about the Bible, to question authority, and trend away from what we saw as a dramatic leftward sort of Marxist shift among young people. Nick, talk a little bit about that. I know that you are just past the age that would be tracking down a Charlie Kirk on campus, but my kids are really devastated by his death, his assassination, and I feel like his power is going to increase from here, not just in his death, but in his legacy.
Yeah, Donna, a tragic situation unfolding Wednesday in Utah when Charlie Kirk was doing what he had done hundreds of times before, showing up to a college campus, encouraging individuals that agreed with him, disagreed with him, to make their way up to a microphone to challenge Kirk on some of his thoughts and some of his beliefs, really kind of reigniting this discussion and topic over, where is the public square? Where are these important, critical, and I'll note even sometimes controversial discussions taking place? Charlie Kirk and the folks over at Turning Point USA brought these discussions and conversations to college campuses all over the United States. That's what Kirk was doing on Wednesday in Utah, when unfortunately an assassin's bullet got the best of him and unfortunately took his life at just 31 years old. Don, he started Turning Point USA when he was 18 or 19 and grew it into one of the largest conservative political action organizations in the United States. It's remarkable the impact and the legacy that he's leaving here on the political system in the United States.
It really is. What do you think?
Yeah, he was one of those generational figures. I think of maybe Ben Shapiro and him as maybe on the same level. A lot of the people at the Daily Wire, I was listening to their coverage of it, and they're saying all of us were very certain that he would one day be president. They're just so confident that he started off at 18 years old with a mission, and he was able to accomplish all of his goals, and he was so focused on improving every area of his life. So he didn't have as much education as some of the others who got PhDs or went to Harvard. So he was always reading, just being self-taught. He was always trying to be better at debate. He was somebody that a lot of people saw, he's still young. He was 31. That he was his trajectory was just to the moon, and if not president, he would have done something really big. So it's tragic in that way. But yeah, he was somebody that did it the right way. You have in history a lot of times ideas have clashed violently, but he was somebody who's, there's a lot of online trolls and people who, I'm going to disagree with you and I'm going to do it in kind of a jerky way online. He was somebody who was giving Generation Z and millennials sort of another path to, you can be respectful. I mean, he would have hard discussions, but he would go into the middle of a crowd, and his mantra was that you can have civil dialogue with people completely different than you.
Right.
I think that takes that founder's idea of, the marketplace of ideas and really doing it in a way where we don't have to have violence. We can talk it out even if we really dislike each other, especially the ideas of the other side, talk it out and see whose ideas are best. So it's really tragic that the person who was going that route is the one who's especially, is a victim of violence.
Right, right. I mean, think about this generation. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and the shooting takes place right during that process. He had just started in what was one of, as has been alluded to, something he's done many, many times.
Sure.
He gets people to come up, start asking him questions, sometimes questions that are sort of challenging his beliefs, and then he responds. I think he was only on the second question, and that's when the shot was fired. That's about the time when people should have sat back and listened and said, okay, I either agree with Charlie Kirk and I want to hear what the other people had to say, or I disagree with him. What's going to be his argument? And is it something that I can buy into, or do I think he's wrong, and here's why he's wrong? That's where the civil debate comes in. And that's, the format that he used, I don't think is the ideal format for changing people's minds, because it's basically a big rally. Most of the people are there, support him. They kind of want to see the other person get owned or get defeated. And that's not the best way to change people's minds. But he was always respectful.
Sure.
He didn't say, throw tomatoes at this person because they disagree with me. He said, I think you're wrong. Here's why I think you're wrong. But thank you for coming and participating. And that was something that was consistent. And if you're going to have civil debate in this country, you're going to have more of that and less of people shouting at each other, being the online trolls who will not actually admit what it is, the terrible things that they're writing. And certainly we don't need the political violence of any type, whether it's this or the Minnesota left-wing politicians who were shot not too awfully long ago. None of that is acceptable in a society like ours.
Sure.
Maybe the irony, the very sad irony, is the question he was answering at the time he was shot was about the rise in political violence, and especially he was saying that a rise in left-wing activism and violence that was making speech, harder to do and more dangerous. So very ironic that was the moment that he was shot.
Yeah, I mean, the question just before it, which I kind of brings me a little piece, it was he was able to give his testimony, his Christian testimony, within minutes of this shooting. So that was an opportunity not many of us get. But, think about the generation that was so influenced by him. They were born around the time of September 11th, 2001. My son is 24, and he was not quite a year old when that happened. And now they've got this. The generation that was most influenced by him came into the world around September 11th, and now they have this moment, this person who was celebrating, values and celebrating critical thinking and celebrating the Bible and celebrating all of these things that may build a better future for them, and now he's gone.
Yeah, it certainly will make an impact, not only for the coming months and years, but probably for much of these people's lives. I mean, our generation, we remember assassination attempts.
Sure.
But
Reagan,
Reagan, there was assassination attempt, but really among major American political figures, no one had been assassinated of that ilk in our lifetimes. You have to go back before we were born, to Robert F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, before that John F. Kennedy, but that was our parents' generation more than ours. This generation, in the wake of 9/11, they have lived through COVID, which is something that was a formative year, in their formative years. They've now had to deal with all of the problems related to that.
Sure.
And now, if they were influenced, or if they had even heard of Charlie Kirk and knew how influential he was, now they have to react to the fact that, oh, this guy who was just here has now been assassinated,
Right.
and that's over.
And maybe we are. Are we there? Are we in a time of political martyrdom? Are we back here? Like
I
from
think
the 60s?
I think my sort of pessimistic take is that we've always been there. I think sometimes conservatives can have a golden age thinking where we look at the past and think, oh, things were so much better there. But I mean, as you alluded to, the 60s were full of assassinations of major figures, and before that it was segregation, and before that you had World War II, and you go back there's always been trouble. I think people on the left maybe more think, instead of golden age, they look to the future as we're going to have a utopia where we're going to fix all of these problems. But I think the founders were smart in just saying humanity is just pretty corrupt and flawed, and you kind of create your government with that in mind. So, but I do think, hopefully we're not heading to, because there is more or less of that violence and corruption. So hopefully we're not headed to a time of more of it. But there's always enemies, foreign and domestic. Like you see, the world's a dangerous place. So this woman from Ukraine, she was fleeing violence abroad, and then gets killed domestically, and then we have 9/11 being foreign violence to our shores, but then we also have all this crime that's more domestic. All of that, I think, is just sort of endemic to the human experience. But we try to find ways to help people's security with police and also the military, but it's never. Sadly, I don't think it's something that's going to be hugely different from era to era. It's going to just be present.
And one sad sign is that all of the politicians have come out and basically said the right thing, really on either side. But there are a lot of people, you see them all over social media, who've been celebrating the assassination of Charlie Kirk.
Right.
And in fact, at least one MSNBC host has been removed for making light of it on the day of, and that's a sad sign. I mean, even if you're just going through the motions and saying, we are thinking about the family and our thoughts and prayers, you are complying with what is expected in the political society. It's not expected and should not even be tolerated that people will be happy and say, okay, who are we going to knock out next?
Yeah.
I mean, that can't be the way that our society moves forward.
Sure. Well, and also it may pull moderates over to be more curious about who he was, which is really interesting, an interesting take on it. Nick, what are your thoughts as we wrap this up?
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to watch and see kind of what the legacy of Charlie, his lasting impacts, and what that legacy looks like. In reviewing some social media activity over the last couple of days or so, I'm seeing from a lot of folks on the conservative side that they continue to repeat this phrase that they're not going to be bullied into submission. They're not going to be bullied into not being able to voice their opinions and voice their thoughts. And that really gets to the core of what Charlie Kirk did so well, encouraging young people, 17, 18, 19 years old, freshmen in college, going through that process of being able to challenge maybe what their professors were telling them, or challenge some of the political beliefs or ideologies that were being beaten into their heads. Charlie Kirk did that really well, and I think a lot of folks are going to probably come forward and say, I'm not going to let that legacy die. I'm going to take that torch and run with it.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Make sure you check out all of these stories. We're going to be tracking what's happening with the state legislature as they come back, start to put some of these things into a piece of legislation, some policy. We'll be following that very closely. So check out carolinajournal.com and make sure you comment here, because we really want to hear from you. Keep this conversation going. We want to know what you think about some of the things we've been talking about. Thanks so much.